Okay, let's try and unpack this. Imagine you're running, say, a huge bank, or maybe a payment network, maybe even a government looking at digital currency. You've got your own systems, maybe you're exploring blockchain tech, but the thing is, you need to connect with everyone else.
Right, other banks, different blockchains, regulators.
Exactly. And it feels like they all speak a totally different digital language. It's a fundamental problem for bringing finance fully into this digital age.
Yeah, that digital Tower of Babel, as you put it, that's really the core issue we're diving into today. Interoperability, specifically how all these different systems, traditional finance and these new distributed ledgers, how they can actually connect and, communicate properly.
Precisely. And to get a handle on how different projects are trying to crack this, we've gathered quite a stack of source material. We're going to do a deep dive into what these sources are telling us about a few key players often mentioned here. Quant, that's QNT, Polkadot, DOT, Chainlink, LINK, and Cosmos, ATOM.
And the material we look through, it's pretty varied stuff. We've got detailed project descriptions from places like Gemini and Cointelegraph, some technical analysis snapshots, market prediction articles from sources like Changelly and HelloSafe.
And even forum discussions, right, like from Reddit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Reddit threads, too, which, offer a different kind of perspective.
Right. So our mission for you today is basically to cut through that mix. We'll unpack what these sources say, pull out the important nuggets, see how they describe these different projects, how they're similar, how they're different, and get a feel for the market sentiment and future outlooks being discussed.
Without getting bogged down in all the jargon or, the online arguments.
Hopefully. And based on the sources we saw, Quant seems to be a real focus, especially its aims with traditional finance interoperability. So while we'll set the scene looking at how the material differentiates all four, we'll then really drill down into what it says specifically about Quant. Think of this as your shortcut to getting up to speed on this particular slice of the crypto world.
Okay, so let's set that stage then. The fundamental problem, as this material consistently points out, is that while distributed ledger technologies, DLTs, and blockchains, they offer real advantages, right?
Yeah.
But they often end up in these silos.
Yeah, they just don't talk to each other easily, or to the existing financial systems.
Exactly. They struggle to communicate effectively, both with each other and, crucially, with those traditional finance systems.
Which means if you build something on one ledger, it's kind of stuck there.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And that really limits the potential, doesn't it? Especially for big, complex stuff like finance that needs systems interacting across different technologies, different borders even.
Yeah, definitely.
So the big goal, the overarching aim these projects have, according to the sources, is this idea of seamless intercommunication, basically creating a network of networks.
A network of networks where value and data can just flow easily and securely between different platforms.
That's the vision. And the sources, they describe our main players here, Quant, Polkadot, Chainlink, Cosmos, as kind of tackling this, but from slightly different angles.
Okay, how so?
Well, Quant, QNT, is consistently described as really focusing on that link with traditional finance, or TradFi as people call it. One conversation we looked at positioned Quant as the project, actively trying to bridge that gap to traditional financial systems.
Okay, so Quant's aiming to be that connector, the bridge between like the old financial world and this new DLT world. What about Chainlink then? How does that fit in?
Chainlink, LINK, is mainly known as an Oracle network. So its primary job is linking off-chain data.
Like real-world data.
Yeah, exactly. Things like weather info, news feeds, maybe real-world market prices, and bringing that information onto blockchains. But importantly, after it's been verified.
Ah, okay. Verification is key.
Right. And one user in the material we saw mentioned that Chainlink sort of does link to off-chain data, but they made a clear distinction. They said it's not the same as how Quant aims to link entire systems.
Got it. So Chainlink brings external data onto the blockchain, whereas Quant is described as connecting whole systems together.
Okay.
And Polkadot and Cosmos.
Polkadot, DOT, and Cosmos, ATOM, they're described more as direct competitors. Their main focus is on interoperability between different blockchains.
So connecting Bitcoin to Ethereum or things like that?
Well, connecting various blockchain networks so they can swap assets and information, yeah, that's the goal. An interesting point mentioned was that DOT can now apparently be found on IBC.
Which is Cosmos' system, right?
Yeah, IBC is Cosmos' interoperability protocol. So that suggests some cross-pollination, maybe. Another viewpoint we saw, though, felt that technically, ATOM might actually be a bit ahead of DOT right now.
Okay, so the sources seem to paint this picture. Quant is bridging TradFi and DLTs, Chainlink is bringing real-world data to DLTs, and Polkadot Cosmos are focused on connecting different DLTs to each other. They're all playing in the interoperability sandbox, but maybe in different corners, according to this material.
That's a good way to put it. Different primary focuses.
Okay, so with that broader landscape sketched out, let's zoom in. What do the sources tell us specifically about Quant?
All right, Quant. Their core solution is called Overledger. And the material really emphasizes this. Overledger is not a blockchain itself.
Okay, not another blockchain. What is it then?
It's described more like a DLT operating system, or maybe an API gateway. The key phrase used is, it's designed for universal enterprise interoperability.
Universal enterprise interoperability. Wow, that sounds big. What exactly does it aim to connect, based on what you read?
Well, what we gathered is it's trying to connect a pretty wide range of things, different DLTs, sure, but also regulatory bodies, existing legacy financial systems, the old databases and networks and data feeds too.
So it's trying to be the glue, the connective tissue for this huge, potentially interconnected network across finance and maybe other industries too.
That seems to be the ambition, yeah, connecting all these disparate parts.
How does it actually do that, though? What's the key functionality mentioned?
The main thing is that Overledger lets developers build something called MDApps. That stands for multi-chain applications.
Multi-chain.
And the really significant capability highlighted is that these MDApps can apparently run on and exchange data between multiple different ledgers at the same time.
Ah, simultaneously. So you're not locked into just one chain for your app.
Exactly. You could build something that, say, interacts with Bitcoin, Ethereum, and maybe Ripple, all within the same application, using Overledger as the intermediary layer. Those were some examples mentioned as compatible.
That does sound like a potentially powerful feature the sources are highlighting.
It really does. And this multi-chain idea, it extends to tokens too. Overledger apparently facilitates creating and using what they call multi-ledger tokens, or MLTs.
MLTs, okay.
And these can use different underlying blockchain protocols. The potential uses described are pretty broad things like stablecoins, maybe central bank digital currencies, CBDCs.
CBDCs again. That connects back to the TradFi focus.
Definitely. Also, things like supply chain tracking, trading assets across different systems, loyalty points programs, even e-money. And they specifically mention involvement with projects like LAC Chain and initiatives with the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS.
Yeah, that BIS involvement, that sounds pretty significant for an international finance body. It really seems to tie into that TradFi bridging strategy they mentioned. Did the sources get into the technical architecture at all?
A little bit, yeah. They mentioned Overledger has this layered structure. There's a transaction layer, a messaging layer, and an application layer.
Okay.
The basic idea seems to be that the transaction layer handles the specifics of actually doing transactions on the different underlying ledgers. Then the messaging layer consolidates the information about those transactions.
But keeps the actual transaction details separate.
Right. One description said it kind of wraps them.
Yeah.
It allows information about the transactions to flow across ledgers without necessarily moving the underlying complexity. And then the application layer manages the overall logic and rules for these multi-chain applications.
So that separation is important for making the cross-ledger stuff work efficiently.
Seems to be the key design principle, yes. Keeping things modular.
Okay, so that's the platform Overledger and how it's supposed to work. What about the QNT token itself? What did the sources say about its role, its utility within this whole ecosystem?
Right, the QNT token. It's a native utility token for the Quant Network. Its main purpose is basically to serve as the payment method for using the network's resources.
How does that work in practice? Like, who pays and for what?
Well, developers and businesses, they need QNT to pay for things like accessing the system's APIs, getting data feeds, setting up connections between different ledgers or systems.
Okay.
And then you have gateway operators, these entities that help route traffic on the network. They apparently pay yearly licensing fees, and those fees are paid in QNT.
Ah, okay. And the Treasury uses it too.
Yes, the Quant Treasury uses QNT to pay those gateway operators for the work they do, so it circulates within the system.
So the token seems pretty integral to actually accessing and running the network. Now, one point that really jumped out, especially thinking about getting big companies involved, was this fiat conversion thing.
Yes. That was highlighted as being really crucial. What we gathered is that developers and businesses can actually purchase their licenses and pay for services using regular money, fiat currency.
Like dollars or euros.
Exactly. And then, behind the scenes, the Quant Treasury takes that fiat and converts it into the necessary QNT tokens.
Why do that?
Well, It's noted as a way to let businesses interact with the network and make compliant purchases without having to directly mess around with buying crypto on exchanges.
Which can be a big headache for large corporations, right?
Yeah.
Compliance, custody.
Absolutely. So this seems designed to smooth that path, lower that barrier to entry for traditional businesses.
That feels like a really key insight, the deliberate choice to make it easier for the TradFi world they're targeting. What about the end users? If I'm using an MDApp built on Overledger?
According to the material, end users might also need to hold some QNT, possibly to access the Overledger ecosystem itself, or maybe to renew licenses or subscriptions for the specific MDApps they're using.
Okay. And there was an important point mentioned about staking, wasn't there?
Yes, that's right. One source explicitly stated that Quant does not currently offer native staking for the QNT token.
Meaning you can't just lock up your QNT somewhere and earn more QNT as a reward.
Correct. Holders can't stake it directly on exchanges or within the network itself to get yield. Its utility, based on this source, is purely functional for accessing and operating the network, paying fees.
Got it. No passive income from staking QNT itself, according to that source. Okay, so we've got the tech, the token.
Yeah.
What do the sources say about Quant's market position, adoption, partnerships? Where does it stand now, or at least when this material was written?
Right, so taking a snapshot from the dates in the sources, roughly December 2024, maybe June 2025, QNT's price was seen trading around $115 to $117 in one source and maybe $92 to $103 in another. Market cap was estimated somewhere between $1.2 billion and $1.7 billion.
Okay.
Its circulating supply was noted as being quite low, around 12 million to maybe 14.5 million QNT. Daily trading volume often over $25 million. And this generally put it somewhere in the top 50 to top 75 crypto projects by market cap at the time.
And that low supply, that was seen as a positive by some.
Yeah, the low circulating supply was definitely highlighted by some commentators as being good for its tokenomics, potentially creating scarcity value down the line.
Right, that makes sense. And the enterprise focus seems to be the main theme coming up again and again.
Absolutely. The material really positions QNT as the solution for enterprise systems that need to integrate with Web3 technologies. And this is where those partnerships and involvements become really important.
Which specific ones did the sources emphasize?
They mentioned some really big names, key partnerships or involvement with Oracle.
The tech giant.
Yep. Also, the European Central Bank, specifically regarding the Digital Euro project, the Bank of England, through something called Project Rosalind, and the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, with their innovation programs.
Wow, those are definitely heavy hitters in traditional finance and tech. These partnerships are presented as being pretty major drivers for Quant's institutional adoption then.
Yes, very much so. They're seen as strong validation and potential pathways to large-scale use.
And regulatory clarity was another point raised.
Yeah, that came up as a significant advantage. Its classification specifically as a utility token by FINMA, the Swiss regulator, was highlighted.
Why is that so important?
Well, the argument is that this reduces regulatory uncertainty compared to a lot of other crypto projects, which might be seen as securities or something else. This clarity is seen as boosting confidence, especially for those institutional partners who absolutely need clear legal ground to stand on.
That makes a ton of sense. If you're a big bank, you need to know the rules you're playing by. Did the sources mention anything about ongoing tech development? Is the platform still evolving?
Yes. They noted recent tech updates like Overledger Fusion and something called Quant Flow, described as a Layer 2.5 upgrade.
Layer 2.5. Interesting.
Yeah. These updates are presented as proof of ongoing innovation. They're apparently expanding the platform's capabilities, especially around things like programmability and better connectivity between different types of ledgers, like the permission ones banks might use, and public permissionless ones like Ethereum, basically adding more advanced features for linking up these different systems.
Okay, so that's the picture we get from the more, let's say, formal reports and analyses. But you mentioned looking at a Reddit thread, too. Those forums can be different. What did that add to the mix?
Yes. It definitely provided a much less filtered perspective, a real mix of strong opinions, questions, debates.
Right. And it's worth remembering, as someone on the thread pointed out, crypto subreddits can sometimes be echo chambers, right? Lots of wide-eyed cheerleading, maybe some bias.
Exactly. That's important context. You have to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But still valuable to see what discussions are happening.
Absolutely. So what were some of the points made in favor of QNT in that forum setting?
Well, similar themes came up, but maybe phrased more. enthusiastically. Things like its focus on linking TradFi, the tokenomics especially, that low supply, the big partnerships and connections were mentioned a lot, and also claims about patented technology, with ISO 2022 sometimes being dropped in that context.
Okay. And what about the other side? What critical questions or counter arguments were people raising in that thread?
There were quite a few, and this is where you see some real pushback. Someone asked if Chainlink isn't basically doing the same thing, just as an oracle for TradFi data, though others jumped in to clarify. Quant's focus is on system seamlessness, not just data feeds like Chainlink.
Okay, that distinction again.
Yeah. And a really big question was just whether Quant is actually superior, or if the hype around it on that particular subreddit was maybe getting ahead of reality.
A healthy dose of skepticism there. What about the actual product? Was that discussed?
Yes, and this was probably the most striking criticism we found in that thread. One user very strongly claimed that Quant literally does not have a working product available right now. Not one that banks or developers can just sign up for, pay for, and start using today.
Wow. Literally no working product.
That was their claim. They dismissed it as basically just an idea, comparing Quant's ambition without, in their view, a usable product to like a 4-year-old who wants to be a rock star, but has nothing to show for anything yet.
Ouch. That's a harsh take. And it seems to directly contradict the other sources talking up BIS and ECB projects using the tech. How do the sources explain that discrepancy? Did any of them address whether those big partnerships are just pilot programs or maybe using a specific non-public version?
That's a really sharp question. And honestly, the sources we reviewed don't directly reconcile that difference. The formal reports highlight the partnerships as evidence of progress, while this Reddit comment claims there's no accessible product.
So they just present conflicting information.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And the key takeaway here, perhaps, isn't definitively knowing who's right at this exact moment, but recognizing that this conflict exists within the source material itself. Even with these high-profile reported collaborations, there's a vocal counter-perspective questioning the current tangible availability of the Overledger product for general use. Seeing that discrepancy is actually a valuable insight we get from looking at these different types of sources together.
That is a really important nuance to pick up on. It highlights the complexity and maybe the different stages these things go through. What else came up in that Reddit discussion?
Well, there was some debate about whether QNT even needs projects like Polkadot DOT, if it's supposed to be the ultimate interoperability solution. One person claimed DOT actually helped Quant in some way, while someone else argued the reverse, that DOT will eventually need Quant.
Interesting debate about dependencies and patents.
Yeah, the patent thing came up again. Someone claimed Quant had patented this crucial world interoperability tech, mentioning ISO 2022 again. But another user pushed back hard, saying that wasn't accurate and claiming that JP Morgan actually holds a broader patent covering a similar concept.
So lots of back and forth claims and counterclaims. That Reddit thread definitely gives you a feel for the ongoing debate and the questions still swirling around the project. It's useful context to have alongside those more polished analyses. Okay, let's try and wrap things up by looking at the investment side considerations, future outlooks presented in the sources.
Sure. So looking at the technical analysis snapshots we found from around that late 2024, mid-2025 timeframe, the market sentiment for QNT was described as generally bullish to neutral.
Okay.
They noted things like healthy momentum, the price consolidating above a support level around $103, and facing immediate resistance somewhere around $116 up to $125. They also mentioned that trading volume tended to surge when positive news came out.
Right, news-driven moves. So a reasonably solid technical picture, according to those analysts at the time. What did the material suggest could be catalysts for growth, looking ahead to maybe 2025, 2026?
Several potential catalysts were mentioned. Things like the impact of those new protocol updates, Fusion and Flow, expected growth in CBDCs and other digital currencies that might use Quant's platform.
Tying back to those partnerships again.
Exactly. Also, the potential expansion of enterprise DeFi, decentralized finance for businesses and NFTs, maybe using Quant's infrastructure. The positive regulatory status, like that FINMA classification, was seen as a continuing plus. And generally, increasing institutional participation, especially if those pilot projects start moving into actual production environments.
Right, moving from testing to real-world use. That all seems logically connected to the core story about enterprise and institutional adoption. Did the sources get into specific price predictions? I know we have to be careful with those.
Yes, they did. And definitely with that caveat, sources like Changelly and HelloSafe provided forecasts. Changelly gave these wide ranges, minimum, average, maximum price predictions, stretching way out like 2025 all the way to 2050.
2050, wow.
Yeah, long-term stuff. And they cited potential ROI figures that, ran into tens of thousands of percent over that very long time frame. HelloSafe gave single price targets year by year from 2025 out to 2029. They projected a price of around $436 by 2029, starting from that $116 level.
Okay, it is absolutely crucial we reiterate here, based on the source's own likely disclaimers, that these are just predictions. They're estimations based on technical analysis and market sentiment at that point in time. They're definitely not financial advice.
Absolutely critical point. Anyone looking at numbers like that needs to understand they are purely speculative forecasts from specific sources. Treat them as such.
Right.
Interestingly, the HelloSafe source also included some general investment tips.
Oh, yeah. What were those? Seemed a bit off topic, but useful maybe.
Yeah, just general advice. Things like, analyze the market, choose a reputable exchange, figure out your budget and your strategy. Are you trading short-term or investing long-term? Keep an eye on news and tech developments. Use risk management tools like stop losses and take profits. And think about timing your exits.
Standard trading advice.
Pretty much. They also briefly mentioned the difference between buying crypto directly spot purchase versus using CFDs, which is more about speculating on price moves with leverage.
Okay, good practical reminders from that source, even if general. What about risks? Did they mention specific risks for Quant?
The main risks noted were pretty general to the crypto space. Susceptibility to wider market volatility. If Bitcoin crashes, everything tends to follow. And the potential for changes in regulations down the line that might force projects like Quant to adapt or change how they operate.
Standard crypto risks then. Okay, wow, we've definitely covered a lot of ground here, digging into all this material.
We really have. Starting from that core problem of interoperability, and then seeing how the sources describe Quant, Chainlink, Polkadot, and Cosmos tackling it, each with kind of a different primary focus.
Yeah, and we really dove deep into what the sources presented about Quant, specifically its Overledger platform, that unique utility token model, especially the fiat conversion aspect for businesses.
Right. Its positioning towards traditional finance, those key partnerships mentioned, its regulatory status in Switzerland, and the ongoing tech developments like Fusion and Flow.
But we also made sure to bring in those other perspectives from the source material. The market sentiment analysis, those future outlooks and price predictions with all the necessary warnings, of course.
And importantly, acknowledging those critical questions and sometimes conflicting views found in places like Reddit, especially around things like whether there's a fully usable product today and the details of those patent claims.
So thinking about you, the listener, why does wading through all this matter? Well, understanding these kinds of distinctions is pretty key if you're trying to make sense of the complex world of crypto infrastructure. It really helps clarify where different projects might fit into the bigger picture of digital finance and these emerging interconnected networks.
Yeah, knowing the different strategies for interoperability. Is it about bridging TradFi? Is it connecting blockchains? Is it feeding data? It gives you a much more nuanced view than just lumping all these interoperability projects together,
Exactly. And hopefully this deep dive into the source material gives you a structured way to absorb this info. We've tried to pull out the key facts, the different opinions presented, and even highlight some of those interesting discrepancies we found.
Right. It should give you a more complete picture than you might get from just reading one article or following one particular online community.
So maybe here's a final thought to leave you mulling over. As traditional financial systems keep doing their, let's say, careful dance towards integrating with blockchain technology, and as things like central bank digital currencies potentially become more real, will a project that's specifically designed to be that compliant, maybe behind-the-scenes plumbing, connecting the old world to the new DLT world like Quant aims to be with Overledger, will that become truly essential infrastructure?
Or will different approaches win out? Will competing solutions carve out their own vital niches? Maybe connecting blockchains directly proves more important, or maybe data oracles become the key link.
It really does seem like the journey towards a truly interoperable financial future, whatever that looks like, it's still just beginning, isn't it? Lots more to watch unfold.